The mission briefing. The fluorescent lights inside the underground command center flickered against the walls, casting long shadows over the men seated at the steel table. It was past midnight, but no one's eyes showed fatigue. They were too focused, too trained for that. At the head of the table stood Colonel Hayes, his weathered face half hidden by the dim glow of the projector. On the screen behind him, satellite images of a remote mountain valley in Eastern Europe glowed in harsh black and white detail. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "welcome to Operation Silent Dagger." The 8 men sitting before him were no ordinary soldiers. They were ghosts in uniform, Task Force Viper, an elite special operations unit pulled from Delta, SEALs and Marine Raiders, men who had lived in shadows, breathed in war, and carried scars they never spoke of. Hayes tapped the screen with a laser pointer. "This is your target, a fortified compound, hidden deep in the valley. Intelligence confirms it's being used as a weapons hub by a rogue militia. Not just rifles and RPGs, heavy systems, surface-to-air missiles, gear that could tip the balance of an entire region if it slips into the wrong hands." The men exchanged glances, not out of fear but calculation. They had breached compounds like this before. They knew what was at stake. "Here's the catch," Hayes continued. His tone dropped, heavier. "This compound isn't on any map, and officially, neither are you. No extraction guaranteed, no support once you're in. If things go south," he paused, letting the weight of the words hang in the stale air, "you're on your own." Captain Daniel Cross, the team leader, leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "What's the window?" 48 hours, Hayes replied. "Insertion by night. You hike in, you take it down, and you disappear before dawn. No trails, no traces." Cross nodded once. No questions, no hesitation. His men trusted him, and he trusted them. At the far end of the table, Sergeant First Class Ramirez smirked under his breath. "Ghosts in, ghosts out, like we were never there." The colonel shut off the projector. The room was plunged into near darkness, save for the dim red light above the exit. "Gentlemen, once you step off, this briefing never happened. You never heard the name Silent Dagger. You never saw me." Cross stood, slinging his pack over his shoulder. "We won't fail," he said quietly, almost to himself. And just like that, the 8 shadows of Task Force Viper walked out into the night, toward a mission that would test not just their skills, but their very humanity. "Would you like me to keep going part by part like we did with the other stories in Insertion?" The twin rotors of the MH-47 Chinook cut through the night sky like a blade, their sound muffled by the vast emptiness of the mountains. The bird flew dark, lights off, hugging the terrain to avoid radar. Inside, the men of Task Force Viper sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Captain Cross checked his gear for the 3rd time, not because he doubted it, but because habit had drilled it into his bones. Every strap, every magazine, every knife, nothing left to chance. His night vision goggles hung ready around his helmet, his suppressed HK-416 across his chest. Next to him, Ramirez leaned back against the bulkhead, eyes closed, chewing gum like he was on a bus ride instead of on the edge of enemy territory. His calmness was infectious, even irritating, but the team had learned to rely on it. If Ramirez wasn't worried, maybe they didn't need to be either. On the opposite bench, Corporal Davis, the youngest in the squad, gripped his rifle so tight, his knuckles turned pale beneath his gloves. Cross caught his eyes and gave a small nod. Davis returned it with a shaky exhale. First real mission, first time off the leash. He'd either make it or he wouldn't. The crew chief gave the hand signal, 2 minutes to drop zone. Cross stood, motioning his men to check final kit. Magazines were tapped, safeties flicked, optics adjusted. 8 shadows rising into readiness. 30 seconds, the crew chief yelled over the thundering rotors. The rear ramp lowered with a metallic groan, and a rush of freezing mountain air filled the cabin. Below stretched a jagged valley of stone and snow, lit only by the thin silver of the moon. Cross raised his fist. "Go!" One by one, the operators leapt into the blackness, parachutes blooming silently above them. The Chinook vanished into the night, leaving no trace it had ever been there. For a few moments, the world was only wind and silence. The ground rose fast beneath them. Thuds echoed in the darkness as boots hit dirt. Parachutes were reeled in, buried under rocks, erased from existence. Within minutes, the team formed up, weapons ready, moving like phantoms through the barren terrain. Silent Dagger is on the ground, Cross whispered into his comms. No answer, just static, exactly as planned. From here on, there would be no hand-holding, no lifelines, only the mission and the jungle of enemies waiting in the valley below. First contact. The valley was deathly quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears and made every breath sound like a roar. Cross raised his fist, signaling a halt. The men dropped into the dirt without hesitation, eyes scanning the ridgelines. Through his NVGs, Cross could see the faint outlines of mud brick villages scattered along the valley floor. No lights, no movement, just shadows and structures that looked abandoned or perfectly staged. Ramirez, eyes east, Cross whispered. Copy, came the reply, calm as ever. Davis adjusted his scope nervously, trying to steady his breathing. He thought he saw movement near a cluster of huts, but when he blinked, it was gone. His mind played tricks, the green glow of the NVGs turning every branch into a rifle barrel. The team crept forward, slow and deliberate, boots sinking into the loose sand. The smell of dust and old smoke clung to the air, carried by a faint mountain breeze. Then it happened. A dog barked, loud, sharp, too close. Cross froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. His earpiece crackled softly with Ramirez's low mutter, "Shit." The barking turned into a furious howl, echoing down the valley. Lights flickered on inside one of the huts. A door slammed. Shadows moved. Cross didn't need to say a word. The men melted into cover, dropping behind crumbling stone walls and dried-out irrigation ditches. Figures appeared, armed men stumbling from the huts, their AKs glinting in the moonlight. They were shouting, confused at first. Then the barking grew louder, frantic, pulling them toward the American team's direction. Davis's finger tightened on his trigger, heart pounding. Permission to engage, he whispered, voice cracking. Cross exhaled slowly, measuring the odds. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more inside the huts. A firefight here would blow the mission wide open. Negative, Cross hissed. Hold. The militants scanned the darkness, one of them shining a weak flashlight across the fields. The beam passed dangerously close to where Davis crouched. Sweat dripped down his back as he tried to control his trembling. The dog lunged forward, snarling, straining against a rope. Its handler cursed, dragging it back. The beam of the flashlight wavered once more across the field, then turned away. Minutes crawled by like hours. Finally, the armed men muttered among themselves and retreated into the huts. The dog barked once more, then fell silent. Cross let out the breath he'd been holding. Move, now. The team slipped deeper into the valley shadows, leaving the near disaster behind them. Every sense was sharpened. They were ghosts, but ghosts could still bleed. And Cross knew, if that had been the first contact, the real storm hadn't even started yet. Into the village. The valley funneled them toward a cluster of half-ruined stone houses. The structures looked ancient, built long before the militia, long before any modern war. Their walls sagged, their windows hollow sockets staring into the night. Cross raised his fist and whispered, "Stack up, quiet entry." Ramirez slid forward, suppressor already attached to his rifle. His broad shoulders brushed the wall as he took point, eyes sweeping for tripwires or makeshift alarms. Behind him, Davis and Corporal Lee mirrored his movements, covering corners. The rest of the team flowed in like water, precise, practiced. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of dust and animal waste. A single kerosene lantern flickered in one of the rooms, illuminating cracked plaster and a rug worn to threads. Then, footsteps. Cross flattened against the wall, raising 2 fingers. Ramirez moved first, ghost-like. A figure shuffled into view, an older man in ragged clothes, holding a clay jug. Not militia, civilian. Ramirez wrapped an arm around his chest, covering his mouth before the man could shout. Cross crouched in front of him, finger pressed to his lips. "Shoo," he whispered, voice low, calm. The man's eyes went wide, terrified. Cross released him after a tense moment, letting him stumble back. The villager bolted out the rear door into the night. Davis hissed, "Sir, he'll bring them right to us." Cross's jaw clenched. He knew Davis was right, but killing an unarmed civilian wasn't an option. Not for him, not for his team, not unless there was no other choice. "Then we move faster," Cross said. They reached the center of the village, a courtyard littered with rusted barrels and abandoned carts. Cross held up the map overlay on his wrist screen. The compound they were after was still 2 valleys over. But this place, This place was a forward post. Through an open doorway, Lee spotted it. Stacks of wooden crates marked with Russian lettering. Ammunition, maybe more. Ramirez smirked. Looks like Santa came early. Cross hesitated. Blowing the cache would cripple the militia here, but it would also blow their cover. The sound of an explosion would echo for miles. He keyed his mic. Options. Park's voice came back, cool and clipped. We plant charges on a timer. By the time it goes off, we're gone. Davis swallowed hard. Or we just leave it. Focus on the main target. Cross stared at the crates, weighing seconds against survival. His team was waiting on his call. Finally he spoke. Plant the charges. 5 minutes on the clock. We ghost out before the fireworks. The men moved instantly, pulling C4 from their packs, setting timers with silent precision. Every tick of the countdown was another risk. When the last charge was set, Cross signaled the exit. The team melted back into the night, shadows against shadows. They had just cleared the last wall when the first explosion ripped through the village. A fireball lit the valley, turning night into day. Flames swallowed the crates, the shockwave rattling windows for miles. Shouts erupted in the distance. Searchlights began sweeping the ridges. Cross didn't look back. Move! Silent Dagger is blown. Every gun in the valley's coming our way. The net tightens. The valley came alive. Engines roared in the distance. Headlights cut across the ridges, and the echo of shouting voices rolled through the night like thunder. The militia had woken, and they were angry. Cross signaled the team into a dry riverbed, its walls just high enough to conceal them from passing trucks. They crouched low, boots sinking into sand, rifles angled up toward the lip of the bank. Ramirez, count, Cross whispered. Ramirez raised his NVGs, eyes tracking the lights zigzagging above. At least 3 trucks, maybe 40 fighters. They're spreading out. They'll sweep every hut, every rock until they find us. Davis muttered, all this over one ammo cache? No. Park replied coldly, all this because now they know we're here. The militia moved fast. Within minutes, searchlights pierced the darkness, sweeping through the village ruins. A flare arced overhead, bathing the valley in ghostly red light. The riverbed glowed crimson. The team froze, every breath shallow. If one fighter looked down, it would be over. Cross whispered into his comms, we move at the next blackout. No noise, no mistakes. The flare sputtered and died. Darkness reclaimed the valley. Go. They crawled forward, one by one, silent shadows slipping along the riverbed. The sound of boots, of gravel shifting, it all felt amplified. The militia voices grew closer, the beams of flashlights bouncing across the rocks above them. Then, Davis slipped. His boot caught a loose stone. It clattered down the bank, loud as a gunshot. Instant silence. Then a voice shouted in the night, over there! Bullets tore into the sand, sparks flying as tracers sliced overhead. The team dropped flat, returning fire in controlled bursts. Ramirez's M4 coughed suppressed rounds, 2 militants dropping before they could shout again. But the damage was done. The militia knew. The net was closing. Cross keyed his mic, voice sharp. Break contact. Move to rally point. Bravo. They sprinted through the riverbed, ducking low as machine gun fire stitched the ridges. Dirt sprayed into the air. Park tossed a flashbang behind them. The valley lit white, screams following as the militia staggered. The team pushed hard, lungs burning until they reached a narrow ravine. They collapsed behind the rocks, hearts pounding. Ramirez grinned despite the sweat dripping down his face. Well, sir, guess Silent Dagger isn't so silent anymore. Cross didn't smile. His jaw was tight, eyes scanning the black horizon. No, now we're the hunted. The ravine twisted like a serpent, its stone walls rising high enough to give cover, but also high enough to cage them in. Cross didn't like it. Every instinct screamed wrong terrain. Keep moving, he whispered, though his eyes never left the ridgelines above. Ramirez jogged beside him, breathing steady despite the sprint. Feels like we're running down a funnel cap. They'll box us in. I know, Cross muttered, but we don't have a choice. Flat ground's worse. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then silence. The gunfire had faded. No shouts, no engines, just wind whistling through the rocks. Davis, panting, glanced around nervously. Why'd they stop? Shouldn't they still be on us? Ramirez spat into the dirt, because they don't have to chase what's already trapped. As if on cue, a flare burst overhead, bathing the ravine in harsh green light. Shadows leapt across the walls, and then came the rattle of machine guns from both ridges at once. Down! Cross roared. The team dove for what little cover there was as bullets chewed the earth. Sparks sprayed from rocks, tracer fire bouncing like angry wasps. They've got the high ground locked.
Lee shouted, returning fire with controlled bursts. His round sparked uselessly against stone. Cross crawled behind a boulder. Radio pressed tight. We need to punch through. Suppress North Ridge, Ramirez. Park, set smoke now. Grenades popped, smoke billowing up in choking grey clouds. It didn't block the bullets, but it broke the fighters' line of sight. Ramirez raked the ridge with fire, his suppressor glowing faint from heat. Move! Move! The team sprinted through the haze, dragging a wounded man by his vest. Machine gun rounds snapped inches from their heads. Davis screamed as a bullet tore into his shoulder, spinning him into the dirt. Cross grabbed him, hauling him up. On your feet, soldier! You're not dying here! They pushed hard, weaving through smoke and bullets until the ravine split into two forks. Without hesitation, Cross chose left. It was darker, narrower, but it led them away from the kill zone. Finally, silence. No more tracers, no shouts, just the crackle of smoke behind them, and the groans of the wounded. Cross slumped against the wall, chest heaving. Ramirez leaned beside him, a grim smile on his lips. Hell of a trap cap. Cross wiped dust from his face, eyes burning with resolve. They think we're cornered. They think they've already written our ending. He loaded a fresh mag, racked the bolt, but we write our own ending. No way back. The ravine spat them out into a wide basin, a natural amphitheater of stone and sand. The moon was low, painting everything in silver, the silence almost mocking. Cross crouched with his map tablet, trying to orient their position. The digital overlay flickered with static. No GPS, no comms, just dead screens. We're blind, Park said quietly, peering over his shoulder. Not blind, Cross muttered. Just cut off. They jammed us. That means we're closer to their compound than they want us to be. Ramirez gave a low whistle. Close as good if we're ghosts. Close as bad if we're prey. The wounded were slowing them down. Davis's shoulder wound was bandaged, but bleeding through. Another operator, Harris, limped badly from shrapnel in his thigh. They wouldn't make a sprint across open ground. Cross faced the team, his voice low but firm. Exfiltration is gone. The bird won't risk picking us up with that many SAMs in play. That leaves us one way out, through the compound itself. Davis blinked at him, pain etched across his face. Sir, you're saying push deeper, into the hornet's nest? Cross nodded. Exactly. We hit them where they don't expect it. Take out their comms, their SAMs, and create our own exit route. Silence followed. The men glanced at one another, weighing the insanity of it. But in the end, no one objected. There was no other option. They began the trek, slipping between boulders and dry brush. Every sound was amplified. The crunch of gravel, the rasp of gear, the hiss of wind. Then came the unmistakable whine of engines. Trucks, several. Lights bobbed on the far ridge, converging like hunters closing on prey. Cross raised his fist. Cover, now! The team scattered behind rocks as a convoy of militia vehicles rumbled into the basin. Technicals mounted with heavy machine guns scanned the open ground with their spotlights. One beam swept dangerously close. Ramirez whispered, "If they stop here, we're screwed." Cross's jaw tightened. He pulled a smoke grenade from his vest, finger ready on the pin. One distraction, one opening. That's all they needed. But before he could throw it, Park pointed upward. Her eyes widened behind the NVGs. On the ridge above, silhouetted against the moon, were more fighters. Dozens, rifles glinting. The militia hadn't just flushed them out of the ravine. They had driven them into a killing ground. The basin ambush. The first rounds hit like a hammer. Light flashed off metal as gun barrels stuttered into life above and below them. The basin, which had felt like a narrow escape, collapsed into a furnace of tracers, dust, and screaming engines. Cross had his men spread in a ragged line, every pair of eyes trained on a different sector. The militia's plan was obvious now. Box them in, burn them out, finish with sweep teams. They had numbers, high ground, and brutal certainty. Task Force Viper had training, instincts, and a shrinking margin for error. Delay and distract. Cross breathed into his throat mic. Ramirez, give me maximum suppression on Ridge Alpha. Lee, take Harris and cut left to that rock spur. Set an IED if you can. Park, you and I will move for the compound comms when the smoke goes. Ramirez didn't argue. He never did. He only sighed. A short noise, and then his M4 erupted. The tracers stitched the ridgeline, slamming into dirt and rock, forcing heads down among the militia. That tiny window of reaction was everything. The Bradleys were gone. The Chinook was a fairy tale. Their air support had been killed on the Vine long before the team reached the valley. This fight was primitive and personal. A technical thundered forward across the basin, its gunners sweeping low. One of the militia vehicles braked hard and turned a heavy mount toward Ramirez's position. The M4's rate of fire climbed into a white noise. Ramirez weaved, reloaded, shouted coordinates over the instant that the radio allowed. Cross moved like a conductor through chaos. Quarters, shifts, micro-movements that kept the team from scattering into nothing. He felt Harris's weight as the wounded man gripped his ankle and stumbled. "You good?" Cross hissed. "Yeah." Harris gasped, face pale. "Just keep moving." Bullets cracked too close. A round skimmed a crate and exploded, throwing shrapnel and sand into the air. Davis went down, sucked backward by the recoil of a near miss and the tightening of pain in his shoulder wound. Cross hauled him to cover with the efficiency of someone who'd done it before. "Medic!" Cross barked. Harris tore off his own bandage roll and clamped it on Davis's arm. The young man hissed but held, jaw clenched. They had a tactic. Use controlled violence to create a route. Ramirez's suppressive fire bought them inches. Lee's detachment, silent and efficient, used the rock spur as a wedge to pry open a lane. Park carried a sat-link jammer and a small demolition package. She kept both close, eyes flicking between digital readouts and burning stars. Halfway through the basin, the militia launched a countersweep. Figures spilled from behind a berm, flanking low and fast. Cross's world narrowed to muzzle flashes and the staccato bark of rifles. Time stilled for a heartbeat, then accelerated. Cross made a decision that split the night. He grabbed a thermite grenade and a radio beacon, glanced once at his team and sprinted. Not toward extraction, but straight into the teeth of the compound perimeter. "Cross!" Ramirez howled, but Cross was already gone. He ran because he knew command communications were the heart of the enemy's net. Kill the net and the hunters scatter, revert to disorganization. Cross had one route in, and he chose it. His boots pounded the scorched dirt, breath burning. Tracers stitched past, spitting hot lines onto the sand. A man in a technical saw him and fired a short burst. Cross hit the dirt, rolled into a culvert, and pushed through a door left ajar. The compound's inner ring was a maze of corrals and storage sheds. Inside, Park waited with the jammer humming, fingers flying as she keyed sequences. She'd found the comm hub according to Cross's last rough overlay. "On you," she whispered into the headset. Then the compound siren screamed to life. The militia realized their nerve center was under attack. Chaos exploded outward like a volcanic cough. Spotlights spun. Men shouted. Dogs barked. The valley's whole shape convulsed. Back in the basin, Ramirez shifted from suppression to covering withdrawal. His voice came ragged over the net. "Move now. You get to the left spur. Move like hell." Lee and 3 others dragged 2 wounded as Cross detonated a thermite charge against a communications stack. The metal shrieked as tempers of molten orange ate circuitry and radios. Sparks rained like cursed stars. Park slammed the jammer into a cradle, and the spectrum around them filled with synthetic noise. Phone calls and short bursts dropped like weak birds shot from the sky. For a handful of breathless minutes, the militia's coordinated voice fell apart. Radios clicked and then hissed. Trucks halted because orders no longer came. The high ground sweepers hesitated in mid-pattern. Confusion was a scalpel that opened the smallest of doors. Cross screamed over the static. "Go! Break left! Now!" They ran. They ran through a corridor of flame and dust and men who had every reason to hate them. Tracers stitched the sky, but without command guidance the militia's fire lost focus, became less precise. Task Force Viper fought like caged animals given a slender crack to bite through. They seized it with teeth. They reached a ridge as dawn threatened the horizon. Behind them, the compound burned, a low, hungry light swallowing its stores. Ahead, a narrow, dry stream bed cut a pale line across the landscape toward a ridge that opened into a saddle, potential exfil route if they could hold to it. But victory was wet with cost. Harris slumped, limp with blood loss despite field dressing. Davis's breathing was shallow. Every step hurt. Lee's left arm hung limp from a deep wound. Ramirez, who'd moved like a mountain all night, had a smear of blood across his temple, but his eyes were steady, still the backbone in a world of broken things. Cross fell to his knees for a single, private second, and let the cool air cut his face. He'd wanted to go for the radios, knew the gamble, and won this round. But winning a battle didn't guarantee freedom. It only created a new set of impossibilities. He keyed the short range, rendezvous at the saddle, consolidate. "We move on my mark." The team gathered around the dying glow of their breach. They were battered, some bleeding, all exhausted, the sort of exhausted that goes deeper than the body, a marrow fatigue that weighs on decisions and dreams. Ramirez limped over and clapped Cross a hand to the shoulder. "You crazy son of a," he grunted, but the gratitude burned clear. "That move bought us a crack cap. You pulled it off." Cross let out a breath that tasted like iron. We bought it. Now we have to buy the next one. They had inflicted real damage. Comms destroyed, supplies burning, militia coordination shredded. But the valley still held fighters and vehicles and no friendly reinforcements. Their route led forward, deeper into unknowns, and the sun would rise on men who had to make impossible choices with every step. As they limped away toward the saddle, a single thought flickered through Cross's head, stubborn and unbidden. The mission was never clean. It never would be. But it had to mean something, some line in the sand that would make the sacrifice count. They would go on. The valley watched them go, wind sighing, the smell of burned radio smoke curling into the dawn. The basin behind them was a crater of noise and flame. Ahead lay the hard, cold certainty of more conflict. Task Force Viper had survived the basin ambush. For now,
The long walk. The sun broke across the horizon like an executioner's torch, flooding the valley with a merciless glow. For Task Force Viper, dawn wasn't comfort, it was exposure. Every shadow they'd used as cover now dissolved, leaving their bruised and battered silhouettes crawling across open terrain. Cross pulled his goggles up, squinting at the endless ridges ahead. "We've got 6 clicks to the saddle," he muttered. "If we're lucky, no patrols between us and there." Ramirez gave a humorless chuckle. "Since when are we lucky?" Lee limped beside them, his wounded arm strapped tight against his body. His jaw was clenched, eyes glassy with exhaustion. "We just need distance," he rasped. "Get out of their net." But distance was no guarantee. The militia wasn't broken. They were enraged, and rage fueled pursuit better than orders ever could. By mid-morning, the stream bed they followed narrowed into a canyon. The walls rose high, baking them in heat and bottling sound. Every footstep echoed like a warning bell. Park stopped suddenly, crouching low. "Tripwire," she whispered. Cross froze, scanning the rocks. Barely visible in the morning light, a filament of fishing line stretched across the canyon floor, leading to a cluster of stones half buried in dirt. "Booby trap," Park confirmed, tracing the line with her eyes. "Pressure trigger. Homemade but lethal." Ramirez spat. "They're trying to herd us, slow us down until they can regroup." Cross signaled for the team to hold. He studied the canyon ahead, shadows twisting, heat haze blurring detail. His gut told him this wasn't just a trap, it was a choke point. "We're in their funnel," he said finally. "We bypass, climb the canyon wall." The men groaned, but no one argued. Better exhaustion than obliteration. They began scrambling up the jagged slope, boots slipping on loose shale. Harris, bleeding badly, had to be half-pulled by Ramirez. Davis's arm wound reopened, crimson staining his fatigues. Halfway up, machine gun fire raked the canyon floor below them. The booby trap detonated, a violent thunderclap that filled the gorge with dust and flame. Shrapnel whined off the rocks where they had just stood. Lee coughed, eyes watering. "If we'd stayed." "We didn't." Cross cut him off. "Keep moving." At the top they collapsed into the dirt, chests heaving. The world beyond the canyon stretched out in cruel infinity, rolling desert ridges with no cover, no sign of life, just heat shimmer. Park adjusted her headset, frustration written all over her face. "Jammer fried their net last night, but it fried ours too. We're still dark. No way to call command." Ramirez checked the horizon, shielding his eyes. "They'll be hunting. Drones, trucks, everything they've got. We can't just walk out of here." Cross stared at the desert, then back at his team. 6 operators remained. 2 were bleeding badly, 3 were barely holding pace, and all of them were running on fumes, yet none of them looked ready to quit. "Then we stop walking," Cross said quietly. "We fight smart. We move only when it counts. Tonight we strike again. One more blow enough to get us out." Ramirez arched a brow. "Cap, you planning to fight the whole militia with 6 broken bodies?" Cross didn't blink. "I'm planning to make them think we're still stronger than we are. Fear buys time, and time is our only ally." The men looked at one another, then nodded grimly. They had no way back, only forward. Ghosts of Silent Dagger. Night returned like a curtain of black velvet, covering their wounds and disguising their movements. But the silence wasn't kind. It was heavy, broken only by the ragged breathing of men who had bled too much and walked too far. Cross crouched at the edge of a ridgeline, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Below, in the bowl of the desert, militia trucks idled, fires flickered, fighters moved like ants, restless, searching. They were spreading their net wider, convinced Task Force Viper was still somewhere in the valley. They think we're an army, Cross muttered. Good, let's keep it that way. The team assembled what little firepower they had left, 2 claymores, 1 thermite charge, half a belt of 7.62 ammo. Their rifles, their knives, their grit. Park checked the detonator on the thermite. 1 shot, she whispered. We set this on their fuel truck. It'll light up half their camp. Ramirez grinned through bloodied teeth. Now that's a distraction I can get behind. Davis, pale but stubborn, adjusted the sling on his rifle. Sir, if we go loud, they'll hunt us until morning. They already will, Cross replied. Better we decide how the story's written. They ghosted down the ridge, shadows among shadows. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. The desert wind covered some of their noise. The militia's shouting covered the rest. Cross and Park crawled closest to the trucks. The smell of fuel and sweat mixed in the still night air. Cross pressed the thermite charge onto the tank, thumb steady on the timer. He set it for 5 minutes. They slithered back into the dark. The explosion was biblical. A roar split the night, followed by a fireball that turned sand to glass. Shockwaves tore through the camp. Fighters screamed in confusion, scrambling in every direction. That was when Ramirez opened fire. Controlled bursts from the ridge above, tracers carving chaos into the chaos. Lee and Davis picked targets, every round measured, every shot meant to wound morale more than men. The militia broke into panic. They fired at shadows, at ghosts that weren't there. Silent Dagger lived up to its name, but victories at that scale are brief. Within minutes, counterfire lashed the ridges. Mortars whistled, shrapnel rained. Harris collapsed under the weight of his wound. Ramirez dragged him until his legs gave way. Park screamed for cover as a truck-mounted gun swept the rocks, shredding stone into dust. Cross knew the truth. This wasn't about surviving the night. It was about ensuring someone, anyone, did. He pulled Ramirez close. You hold here. Make them believe we're still everywhere. I'll take Park and Davis through the saddle. Ramirez's eyes burned. He understood. He didn't argue. Go, he said. Make it count. Don't miss the next story. Subscribe now and join us for more untold war tales. The last sight Cross had of Ramirez was of a man braced against his rifle, muzzle flashing bright against the dark, laughter on his lips despite the gunfire that tore the air around him. Cross, Park and Davis ran. They ran until their lungs were fire, until dawn crept across the sky again. Hours later, a lone drone, American, not militia, found them collapsed on the desert floor. Extraction came like a dream, rotors chopping the air, medics shouting, hands pulling them into safety. But it wasn't victory that sat in Cross's chest. It was weight, the weight of the men who hadn't made it. Ramirez, Harris, Lee, ghosts now, forever part of Silent Dagger. Back at base, command debriefed them. Questions, reports, endless paperwork. None of it mattered. What mattered was this: a handful of soldiers cut deep into enemy lines, struck where it hurt, and came back alive. Not all of them, but enough to tell the tale. Silent Dagger had been bloodied, broken, nearly buried, yet their name would ripple in the dark corners of war stories, the kind only soldiers tell, the kind commanders never write down. Cross sat alone that night, staring at the desert beyond the wire. The sand carried secrets, and so did he. They weren't just a team anymore. They were ghosts,